Hey, and welcome back to another episode of the Relationship Schools podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gaddis. Grateful to be here. If you're new, welcome. This podcast is all about love, relationship, and how do we do relationships better? How can we make that happen in our lives? We talk about long-term relationships, family relationships, friendships, co-working relationships, but mostly we just want to help you get more self-aware and better at being in the driver's seat of being a relational leader. All right. If you are returning, welcome back. Thanks for playing. Thanks for your reviews, guys. Here's one from MCK on Apple Podcasts. 600% recommend. Jason Gaddis has been guiding me through my relationship world for years now. Each podcast is unique, and the speakers he hosts are powerful. I like to pick certain podcasts that target what I'm needing to learn through relationship and find something fruitful each time. Although geared toward men at times, I find the podcast particularly relevant to anyone, including myself as a woman, and I recommend this to anyone, whether in a relationship or single. Thanks, Jason. Cool. You're welcome, MCK. And interesting, that's so curious that in your experience, it feels like I'm more directed towards men. I'm curious if the rest of you would feel that way. Being that the majority of our listeners are actually women. But obviously, being a dude, I tend to probably language things towards the men, perhaps. I don't know. That's interesting. Thanks for the feedback. If you want to leave us a review, please do so. It helps us climb the rankings. It helps us get more listeners and get more change in the world, right? Like, if the world could be more relationally competent, I think we'd all be better off. Okay, in this episode, we've got Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience, Julianne Holt-Lunstad from BYU. Dr. Holt-Lunstad's research is focused on the long-term health effects of social connection. Her work's been seminal in the recognition of social isolation and loneliness as risk factors for early mortality. Dr. Holt-Lunstad has worked with government organizations aimed at addressing the issue. She has provided expert testimony in a U.S. congressional hearing, provided expert recommendations for the U.S. Surgeon General, Emotional Well-Being in America initiative. She was also mentioned in Vivek Murthy's new book, Together, which you should check out. It's really good. And she's currently a member of the technical working group for the UK cross-departmental loneliness team. She also serves as a scientific advisor for the Australian Coalition to End Loneliness, the Foundation for Art and Healing, and Research Advisory Panel for AARP Services, United Healthcare, Rural Aging. She's got a number of awards here. The Citation Award for Excellence by the Research Society of Behavioral Medicine, the George A. Miller Award from the American Psychological Association, Mary Lou Fulton Young Scholar Award, and on and on. Okay, this woman she's been on Scientific American, Time Magazine, Washington Post, New York Times, Today Show. Her research has been featured in a lot of places. And I first heard about her, I believe, researching, just Googling stuff on loneliness, and a number of articles came up. It felt really timely to do this podcast interview. We talk all about loneliness, social isolation, living alone, and the costs of that on the individual, the cost to our health, society. This is kind of an intense listen, okay? I'm just going to be honest here that this is not one of those inspirational, feel good, hey, let's go conquer the world. This is like a little sobering. So if you know someone who's living alone, which is a lot of us right now because of the coronavirus, but if you know someone who's, feeling alone or isolated, and maybe it's time to reach out if you're not already doing that. So we talk all about loneliness. Incredible statistics in this interview here, and I think it's going to be enlightening. I am particularly interested in this because I want to change the world through connection and relationship, as you know, and this kind of material helps galvanize things for me. Like, yep, exactly. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. All right. This is why I want to help you and other people feel more connected, right? And one of the most interesting things, I think, is we can have lots of friends, but we can still feel very alone. And we talk about this in this interview. Okay, stay tuned to the end to your action step and enjoy this interview. Welcome to the show, Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Did I pronounce your name okay?
Yes, you did.
All right. Awesome. Julianne, I know I just read your bio. Will you just give the listener a sense of what you're up to in the world right now?
Sure. So a little bit of background on me. My research focuses on social relationships and how it impacts our physical health. And I've been doing research in this area for almost 2 decades now. While social isolation and loneliness are perhaps seeming to be new topics of interest within the last few years, and certainly of greater interest in light of the current pandemic, we've really been studying this, and this has been an important issue for some time now. The awareness is finally catching up, but we still have a ways to go.
Yeah. Again, I just want to say thank you for doing the enormous lifting of research so that we have the data to understand that this is a real problem, that social isolation is actually not good for us at all. So I'm just grateful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. I've interviewed a lot of people on this podcast about relationships and neuroscientists and teachers and so forth about the health component of good relationships in a 75-year Harvard study. And when I stumbled across your research, it was really eye-opening. And I'm just like, oh my God, like why is no one talking about this? Like, this is so intense. That one of the quotes you say is that social isolation and loneliness is like more lethal than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's kind of one of the famous sort of sound bites from a lot of the articles I see you quoted in. And, so that like helps people wake up like, what? I guess it'd be great to understand, like, is that really true? And how do you quantify how big of a deal this is?
Yeah. So I think it's important to give a little context to that because sometimes, well, first of all, of course it can sound a little shocking. And so as I mentioned, I've been doing research in this area for nearly 2 decades. And of course, I'm not the first researcher to look at the association between relationships and health, and particularly mortality. And so, this has been going on for some time, but yet has been completely under-recognized. And so my colleagues and I decided to really synthesize all of the available data. And so that statistic that you quoted comes from that. So we gathered all of the available data worldwide that have been published to that point on the effects of social connection on how long we live. And what we found was that people who are more socially connected had a 50% increased odds of survival. And we knew darn well that people wouldn't know what that meant. 50%, what is that? And of course, we're constantly bombarded with the latest health findings of, eggs are good for us or eggs are bad for us. And that it can be hard to know just how seriously to take something for our health. And so what we did was we took that evidence and benchmarked that relative to other kinds of risk factors that, of course, we do take very seriously for our health. And so included in that were things like smoking and smoking cessation, excessive alcohol consumption,
obesity,
physical inactivity, obesity, air pollution. And what we found was that the effect that this has on mortality was comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes per day and exceeded the risk associated with some of those others that I just mentioned. And so what that suggests is that we need to start taking our relationships very seriously for our health.
Yeah, completely. Okay, cool. I want to get into this a little more. Before I do, though, I'm so curious how you got into this work. Why study social relationships and loneliness in the first place? How did you stumble across this? What was going on in your life? Can you give us kind of a little backstory?
Yeah. Well, it really started in the fact that I had a lot of interests, and so I found myself really drawn to interdisciplinary kinds of fields. And so I initially really started out with my work focused on stress and health and psychophysiology uh, and social relationships was still a part of that, but it was really initially focused primarily on how relationships help us cope with stress, and therefore, we may suffer or be less likely to suffer the negative health effects of stress, but also how relationships may be sources of stress. And but there was the recognition that, of course, we go to our relationships during a variety of contexts, not just stress. And of course, our relationships are impactful in our lives beyond just the context of stress. And so this really took me into much more of a focus, broader interest in relationships and how that impacts our physical health. And then, of course, uh, there's the protective effects of being socially connected, but then there are the detrimental effects of lacking connections, whether that be isolation or loneliness or even poor quality relationships. And so it's really been evolved over time, but really connected to how our experiences also impact our bodies and our health.
Yeah, yeah, completely. Were you the type of I guess just growing up as a kid, did you have any experiences around social relationships or loneliness that it sort of informed this before you even knew it? I'm just curious about that.
You know, probably not on a conscious level. I think we all experience the ebbs and flows of life and relationships. And I grew up in a big family and surrounded by others. And so I'm sure, that may have played some role. But it wasn't necessarily, one experience that say, oh, okay, I need to study this because of this experience. But rather just the broader recognition of just how important our relationships can be on almost every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. Yep, completely. So when you, my understanding of the study, the initial study that I read it was, as you were saying earlier, it's kind of an amalgamation of, you began with taking all the previous studies done on loneliness. Is that right? You combined them and then you did your own research in addition to that, or your first thing was just to combine them and then study that data?
So I've done lots of studies, and so there are some studies where we've collected our own data, and then the meta-analyses where we were able to establish the effect on mortality. That was combining the available worldwide data, and so I've published two different ones. The first one was focused on social connection, and that included data from 148 studies. And over 300,000 participants. And the second one that one was focused specifically on social isolation, loneliness, and living alone. And that included data from over 3.4 million participants. And so, for those who may not be as familiar with what a meta-analysis is, as I mentioned, I'll collect studies, and of course, other researchers collect studies, or conduct studies, I should say, and these are incredibly informative. But I'm sure, as listeners may be aware, at times we wonder, okay, well, that study was specific to people who are in Denmark. What about people in the U.S.? Or that particular study was focused on older men. What about younger people and women? And so any one study might be limited in terms of its sample.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we include data from, across all of these, we're getting a sense of what the big picture is. So what does all of the data, and we're able to statistically combine it. So we're not just eyeballing it. Okay, this one found a moderate effect and this one found a strong effect, and making a judgment call. We're actually taking the data and combining it. And so averaged across this, they followed people on average for 7.5 years.
Yeah.
It was consistent across age, across gender, across country of origin. And so this is incredibly robust data, because it is able to combine these various studies.
I want to talk about there's two different studies you said. There, one was 300,000 participants and one was 2.4 million. Is that right?
So the first one was a little over 300,000, and the second one was 3.4 million.
3.4 million.
I think.
Okay.
I'm like, now that you said that, now I feel like I need to go back and double check it.
And what can we call the first one and the second one, just so we can talk about these for context?
So the first one really looks at a variety of aspects of being socially connected. So the protective effects of our relationships. Whereas the second one really looks more at social deficits. So isolation, loneliness, and living alone, and the risk associated with lacking social connection.
Oh, cool. So that's so great. Protective aspects and deficits. So let's talk about the first one. Protective aspects. Give us a couple of the bullet points or highlights on what this study found.
Yeah, so this is the one that found that being more socially connected was associated with a 50% increased odds of survival. And so, of course, studies are look at the ways in which we connect socially in a variety of different ways, from the structural aspects. So, meaning, what is your living situation? Do you live alone or not? Or the size of your household? Are you married? But also the size of your social network, how frequently you interact with others. But also included studies that look more at the functional aspects. So do you have people that you can count on for emotional support, for tangible support, for advice? As well as some of the quality of relationships. And we look to see if any of these were better predictors than others. And what we find is that across these, each of these are associated with increased odds of survival, and measures that assess across these, so that are more diverse measures or complex measures of social integration, that look across both, do relationships exist in your life, but also what functions do they serve, and those seem to have the strongest. In fact, those were associated with a little over 90% increased odds of survival. Suggesting that our relationships can serve many purposes in our lives, and are quite protective.
So 90% odds of survival increase. Now, you said that was the more someone said, I have someone I can count on. Is that kind of in other words, the closer or better the relationship? Was there a...
the ones that were over 90% are ones that measured both the structural and functional, meaning do these relationships exist in your life and what functions do they serve? So
Got it.
Either one alone was predictive, but when measures it combined and looked at both, those were associated with the strongest effect.
Okay. And when you say survival, just so I'm clear, 90% odds of survival, that means like, does it mean longevity, or does it just mean that I'm going to live because at some point I'm going to die? Like, I'm assuming it's connected to longevity.
Yeah, so it in essence means you're going to live longer, but how it's actually measured is that these studies, they asked participants these questions at one point in time, followed them over years or decades to see whether or not their level of social connection predicted who would be alive and who would be dead at the follow-up. And people were much more likely to be alive. They were over 90% more likely to be alive at that follow-up if they, both had people in their lives, but also people that, that they could count on and that served these important functions, compared to those that didn't report that. They were more likely to be dead at the follow-up.
Yeah. Whoa. So to translate in practical terms here for me, because I have a good marriage, I'm going to live longer than someone who doesn't.
And generally, so there are studies that look specifically at marriage, and that's another way of looking at that. And that data is consistent, that not only are people who are married generally live longer, but the quality of that marriage does matter. And in fact, there's some work that shows that it's really those that have high quality marriages that are living longer, and that actually a poor quality marriage is associated with risk. So it's important that quality does matter.
Absolutely. It's almost like you're saying the extent into the quality which I have good relationships is proportional to longevity, like how well I'm going to do into old age and how long I'm going to live.
Yeah, and in fact, there was another group of researchers that combined 4 nationally representative samples, and what they found was a dose response effect. So for every level of increased social connection, there was a decrease in risk, and that was, and they looked across not only mortality, but they also looked across some of the biological mechanisms that would inform, how it is that we're living longer or shorter lives, and so they found that across those as well.
That's cool. Okay, let's talk about the deficit study, the 3.4 million participants. Just explain what, like, deficits basically mean people who had compromised relationships or were isolated socially.
Yeah, so we looked specifically at loneliness, social isolation, and living alone. And so keep in mind that these are distinct. They can co-occur, but are somewhat distinct. So for instance, you can be lonely but not isolated or live alone. So even people who are surrounded by others or may even live with others may still feel profoundly lonely. I'm sure many of your listeners have experienced times where they've felt alone in a crowd or alone at a social gathering.
Totally.
And similarly, you can be socially isolated and not feel lonely. You might actually take great solitude and pleasure in some time alone. And someone who lives alone may not necessarily be isolated either. They may have a wide social network, but still live alone. And so these are distinct indicators, although they can co-occur in some cases. And what we found with this one was that loneliness was associated with a 26% increase risk for earlier death, social isolation a 29%, and living alone a 32% increased risk for earlier death. So each of these significantly predict risk for premature mortality.
Did you say 29% on the social isolation one?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, wow. So those are increase in someone dying sooner.
Yes.
And did you also talk about, as I think some of the studies I read, you talked about health complications. So it's not just about longevity, but there's significant health impacts. Can you talk a little bit about how loneliness, social isolation, and living alone impact someone's health, and what are the kind of big markers around that?
Yeah. So these have also been linked to risk for other kinds of chronic illnesses. So, for instance, increased risk for heart attack and stroke, increased risk for type 2 diabetes. There's also risk for, it's been associated with poor immune responses, so increased susceptibility to a cold virus and respiratory illnesses. There has been research that shows that these have been linked to various biological mechanisms that are health relevant. So, for instance, chronic loneliness has been linked to chronic elevations in inflammation. And inflammation is important because inflammation is implicated in a variety of chronic illnesses, from heart disease to diabetes, cancer. But inflammation has also been implicated in mental health outcomes such as depression and cognitive health outcomes, including Alzheimer's disease. And so this may be a potential common mechanism by which being socially isolated or lonely can in turn have an impact on physical health outcomes, mental health outcomes, and cognitive health outcomes. And indeed, there is evidence of each of those outcomes. And so the experience of being socially isolated or lonely can be distressing, and that distressing feeling can lead to these physiological changes that, in turn, if experienced chronically, can impact these long-term health outcomes.
Yeah, and do you have any specific numbers on some of the links to mental health or physical health or the inflammation, just like X%, or I'm just curious if...
Not offhand. I mean, I can. There are a number of studies that show these effects, and so they may vary slightly depending on whether what the sample characteristics. The one study that I mentioned earlier, where they had 4 nationally representative samples. This was across ages, so it included adolescent, middle age, or so adolescents, adulthood, middle-aged adults, and older adults. And what they found was that this was also linked to a marker of chronic inflammation, C-reactive protein. And so that was one indicator that was a dose response, so a dose response effect. And they also found that for blood pressure and BMI as well.
Wow. When you, I'm just curious to kind of just check in with you right now. Like when you hear all of this stuff and you hear yourself say it, I mean, what does it bring up for you, and what do you feel when you look at all this data?
It reminds me, of course, that as I'm studying this, I need to personally prioritize my own relationships for my own health. In addition to, of course, speaking to you and others, that I need to take this seriously myself. And in thinking about some of these long-term effects, it's what we do now and every day of our lives that leads to some of these long-term effects. And I think many of us think that's so far down the road, and that you can worry about it, when you're older.
Yeah.
But this is something that we need to take serious at every age. And in fact, some of the recent data is suggesting some of the highest prevalence rates of loneliness is among Gen Z and youth. And so prevention is the best medicine. And so, I think about to ensure not only my personal health, but others, that we are consciously mindful of this before it becomes a serious problem,
Totally.
rather than waiting until we're seriously suffering to take steps.
When you say highest prevalence among Gen Z, do you mean out of the loneliness, social isolation, or living alone? Which was it in a category?
So surveys that have looked at loneliness specifically are finding that and this is across several studies, not just not necessarily my work. In fact, there was a large Cigna survey that came out in 2018, and then they published a follow-up to that recently prior to COVID-19. There have been the BBC survey, other kinds of surveys that look at the prevalence of loneliness and look at characteristics of those who might be at greatest risk. And some of the highest prevalence rates are among Gen Z.
What's your kind of working theory of why that is?
Yeah, so I know many people are pointing to the role of technology, just given that there has been such a shift in the role of technology in how we interact socially. But of course, that's not isolated just to Gen Z. Many of us are using technology more widely. And so that might be part of the explanation, but I highly doubt it is the entire explanation.
Sure.
And so I think that's an area where we absolutely need to understand better. And I had a conversation earlier just today with another organization that's collecting data on kids even younger. And what their preliminary data is showing is that it's even higher, even among younger kids. And so with this trend, yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking and alarming, but what we really need to do is to better understand this, because if we can understand the causal factors that may be driving this, we may be better equipped to take action in terms of preventative and intervention efforts. We've had greater attention for older adults, and we have a better understanding of what factors may be contributing to older adults' loneliness, some of which may apply to younger samples, but others are going to be different. And And so, we can draw upon the similarities, but where there may be unique life circumstances and other kinds of factors, we really need to be much more attentive to this. And with the current COVID pandemic, I'm personally concerned about younger generations. I'm seeing the kinds of life disruptions. Even if we talk about Gen Z specifically, some of these typical life transitions are severely disrupted. Whether that's graduation, starting college, for many of these students, it's okay. College isn't happening; it's going to be online,
Right.
and it's not just about the education, but going off to college and leaving home for the first time, of course, can be a life transition that could potentially increase loneliness, but also, is one of those social transitions that that they won't be experiencing if they're online. And so we really need to understand this a lot better, for sure. And then, of course, younger kids that aren't going to school, how is that impacting their development? Not only academically, but socially as well.
Yeah, man, so intense for me to hear all this. And it's not news for me, but it's good to get the kind of data to kind of reinforce, like, oh shit. And I'm curious, just so for context, Gen Z is, how would you define Gen Z? What ages?
Well, I have seen, and in fact, if you Google it, you'll find different ranges. And so, generally speaking, 18 to 24. Sometimes they'll say 18 to 28. So you'll see varying. So you can always, if you're looking at some of these surveys, it's always good to see how they defined it.
Yeah, cool. Hey guys, Jason here with a quick interruption. Please consider helping other people right now. One of the ways you can do that is to become a relationship coach. You invest in yourself, train, learn how, and then you get paid to help other people. I think a career as a relationship coach is pretty outstanding right now and a very hot thing to be doing because you can work from home, work for yourself, get paid well, and you're living a life of deep meaning and service to other people. If you want to check out our coaching program, go to relationshipschool.com/RCT if you want to apply. All right, let's hear from one of our level 1 relationship coaches, Lona from Canada, on what she had to say about our program.
Hi, I'm Lona. I'm a level 1 certified relationship coach, and I'm in Nanaimo, Canada. I'm a helper, and I'm super curious. And I love having conversations with people around what's really important to them. One of the things that really impressed me and was really transformative for me was how empowering it was for people to get in touch with their own experience. And the second thing that was really amazing and impactful for me was the transformative power of being witnessed, supported, and challenged by another person. As a result, I feel like I'm a better coach. I can help more. And certainly my curiosity has been honed. And I just think that anyone who's really interested in helping people to really get in touch with themselves, to evolve into greater versions of themselves. If you're that kind of coach, then the relationship coach training is something you should consider. I'm so glad that I did.
Okay, Lona, thank you so much for your effort and becoming a relationship coach with us. You can hire Lona if you go to relationshipschool.com/coaching. And she's up in Canada, but she works anywhere in the world. And if you want to apply to our coaching training, go to relationshipschool.com/RCT to apply. All right, back to the podcast. I got a couple theories I'd love to run by you if you're open to it on why
Sure.
this is. Just being a relationship guy and studying human relationships and working in the trenches with people every day about this. I'm so with you that the pandemic has really got me pretty concerned about our mental health here and the what I think I've heard you call the loneliness epidemic, and what Vivek Murthy has taught, use those words, and how that's going to get worse, right? Given we're all kind of isolated and we don't get this college social experience, and we're comparing ourselves to everybody on Instagram. And anyway, it's intense. So one of my theories is, especially for young people, is that their Instagram and social media really have heightened people's comparison. And when we post things that are only happy and they only tell the one side of the story, we think we're the only ones struggling with what we're struggling with. And it gets into this constant comparison game. And that's where I think social media is a real problem for young people. So that's part of my theory.
And there is some data to suggest that social comparison can have some of those negative effects. And in fact, there have been some preliminary surveys I've seen or come across that have shown for some young people that the pandemic has provided some kind of relief, in the sense of there's not that pressure to be out socially, and there's so less of that, FOMO, because everyone's at home.
Right. There's nothing to miss out on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. That's enlightening. I always love little positive sparks like that. And then the other part of my theory, just from my own experience, sort of growing up, feeling like as a young boy, I had to kind of stuff my feelings and emotions, or that's the message I got. And so I chose to kind of disconnect from the things that were actually potentially good for me relationally, like my emotions and my sensitivity. And as I grew, I made a lot of friends, but I felt alone. So I think that's kind of the hallmark of loneliness, isn't it? Where you have people you're connected to, but you feel alone.
Yeah, in fact, the definition of loneliness is the discrepancy between one's desired level of connection and one's actual level of connection.
Wow. Okay. So that reinforces it for me that my felt sense of connection was like I had a ton of friends. I lived with 17 guys in a fraternity house, and everybody liked me, and I had everybody's approval, and yet I felt kind of empty inside, right? And I meet so many people like I used to be that, just my working theory here is because we get disconnected from ourselves because we feel like we can't be ourselves, and we've got to hide and posture and fit in and belong. We got to do all these things to be okay in a social group. No one's actually knowing who we really are in there. And it becomes really scary to kind of go in there, and then we get into an adult partnership like a marriage, and it all comes spilling out sideways. So I'm just curious what you think of kind of that theory.
I think one of the things that you just described is, a great example of how you weren't socially isolated. You had lots of relationships, but yet may have felt lonely, just given that discrepancy. And I think it also illustrates the importance of recognizing that because loneliness is a subjective experience and it's based on that discrepancy, there can be individual differences between those desired level of connection. And so some of us may expect much more. And in fact, there's an example that a colleague of mine will often use of comparing, a grandmother in Italy to a grandmother in Scandinavia, and the grandmother in Italy may see her grandchildren much, much more than the grandmother in Scandinavia, but because of the cultural difference in expectation around what what is expected, that grandmother in Italy may feel much more lonely than the grandmother in Scandinavia. And so, that illustrates a cultural example, but this could also be based on personality, or the depth of the relationships that you're desiring. And so one of the things that you illustrate is that may, that discrepancy could also be based on the depth of those relationships and the extent to which you feel known and understood and accepted, rather than simply, degree of contact, as would have been illustrated more in the grandmother example, right?
Yeah, totally. And I just think, kind of per your point on the first study we were talking about, it's like, do I have people I can count on? And it's weird. I had people I could count on, but not for my inner life. That was hidden from everybody's view. I could count on them if I got a flat tire, or if I needed to be picked up at the bar or something like that, in that way. But if I actually revealed who I truly was, the fear was everybody's going to run the other direction. And maybe it would not have been true. Like, people would have actually shown up for me. But I wasn't.
And I love that you mentioned that, because what you illustrate is that we have different kinds of needs. And what you just described were emotional needs, as well as like physical or tangible kinds of needs.
Yeah.
And both are important. If you don't have someone you can count on to pick you up from the bar or to help you out when you have a flat tire, that can be, really, really stressful, particularly anyone with a chronic health condition. If they don't have someone they can count on for a ride or to help them, pick up their medications, or, but even just the stress of feeling alone in the world, that you don't have anyone you can count on, that can be really important. But even when you do have those tangible needs met, there may be those more emotional needs. And what's important is that both of these have been linked to important health outcomes, and we need both. And so, I often hear people pitting one against the other, is this one more important than the other? But we really need, to have multiple needs met. And that's also why research has shown that having a diversity of social types of social relationships or social roles can better fulfill these different variety of needs that we have. And that's why, the needs that are met through your spouse might be very different than the needs that were met through your friends, or if you have children, or your coworkers. And so, our relationships are can serve a variety of needs, and when they're not being met, of course, that can be distressing and potentially detrimental also. Yeah.
The study you just sort of mentioned, you kind of referred to there lightly, was this connection between physical health and mental health outcomes, emotional needs and physical needs. I was looking at the wrong place in my notes. Do you have the name of that study? I'd love to look at those two studies.
There's not necessarily one study. There's lots of studies.
Okay. Do you have one that you would recommend I could look at? Particularly around the emotional needs.
Yeah. So one of the key measures of social support has subscales that includes emotional support, tangible support, informational support, and belonging support. And so any study that's ever used that survey will look across all of those aspects that could get at that.
Okay. And maybe after the show here, after we hit record, is it possible I could get a few links from you, or you could refer me to a place and I could?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Do you get any, Julianne, I'm curious if you get any pushback on, or buts when you put your research out there and people are like, yeah, but like, what's the sort of most common yeah, but that you get?
Oh,
And the naysayers that say this isn't a big deal or your research is flawed or whatever.
there's two different ones. So, well, there's more than two.
I bet.
So when it comes to the actual research itself, people will say, yeah, but is this causal or is it just correlational? And really what they're getting at is the fact that, we can't ethically isolate people, randomly assign people to be put in isolation and then randomly assign people to be more socially connected, and that in essence, our own life circumstances lead to these different experiences, and so it's more correlational. However, the very same issue came about in terms of trying to claim that smoking caused cancer. Because we can't randomly assign people to be smokers and people to be non-smokers. And yet we regularly accept that smoking causes cancer. And really what happened is there's actually this Bradford Hill criteria that helped establish that causal aspect. And so, and what that includes, and that's what helped establish the causal relationship between smoking and cancer. And that criteria, without going into a ton of detail, because I could go through like all.
Sure.
We have animal research that is causal. We have, longitudinal. We have all of these different criteria, and the evidence for social relationships, or social connection, or social isolation. That meets all of those same Bradford Hill criteria. And so that evidence does meet that criteria to be considered a causal risk factor for premature mortality. So lacking social connection, we can say that it is a causal risk factor.
Okay.
Another yeah, but is, okay, we know we have good evidence that it affects our health, but why should we promote this for public health if we don't have good a go-to solution? If we don't have a gold standard treatment for it.
That seems kind of weak. Yeah. Okay.
And I guess my pushback is, well, then should we not prioritize obesity, because we don't have a gold standard treatment for obesity either.
Right.
Many public health issues, we don't have a proven effective treatment for everybody, right? And
that's a fantasy.
And that's why they they're still considered public health issues, because they're issues that we're still trying to solve. And similarly, we still need to solve this issue, even though we don't have a go-to effective solution that will work for all. The other but I get is, that's important, but why should we prioritize this when there are so many important issues? There's gun violence. We've got the opioid epidemic.
Climate change. There's cancer.
Climate change. There's all of these different issues that, of course, are also important. And I guess my rebuttal to that is that our social relationships and lacking them, for that matter, may be an underlying cause and may help us solve these other issues, and that these aren't necessarily competing interests. And so by solving social isolation, that, as if it's that easy, right? But by addressing it and reducing it, that might help us in the efforts towards, for instance, the opioid epidemic, suicide,
Sure.
gun
Obesity,
violence,
like so many things, so many human
been,
problems, right?
terrorism for that matter. And so we can think about how this particular issue may contribute to many of these other issues. And so we don't necessarily need to view these as necessarily competing interests.
Yeah, I'm so with you. I mean, it's pretty clear that from a lot of other research that trauma, for example, childhood trauma and neglect creates, what the ACEs study creates all kinds of challenges for people later in life. So I'm with you. I think for me, it's near the hub or the center or the root of so many of these other challenges that we face. I'm guessing, just a couple more questions and then we'll stop here. Funding. I'm assuming because this is a newer emerging kind of problem in the world that's still not, in my opinion, getting that much attention. Where does it compare to, say, funding that's happening for, say, in terms of funding that is directed at trying to solve the problem or find the problem and help solve it? Where does it compare, just so we know how other people perceive this problem? Like dollars, right, kind of is a good indication.
Yeah, I mean, just broadly speaking and historically speaking, anything that is considered the social sciences have been grossly underfunded relative to what is broadly considered part of the natural sciences.
Yeah.
And so it's often viewed as more of a fluffy kind of issue relative to others. And I have been heartened to see with the COVID-19 that there has been a few funding opportunities that have become available just recently. I'm not aware of how those funding opportunities compare to, say, other aspects of that. So I'm sure there's far more funding directed towards some of the biomedical research relative to the research around the effects of social isolation due to this. So, it's one of those things where we need to recognize that these are intertwined issues, and even if we think about this pandemic, part of the solution is a social solution, whether it's what's being referred to as social distancing, which most of us are arguing we should change that to physical distancing and staying socially connected while physically distanced. But around the messaging around wearing masks. I mean, all of these things are, whether people practice these or not, are in large part socially related, and so it's important to recognize that every aspect of our lives is socially relevant. And I think this pandemic, as we've seen, has changed almost every aspect of our life, from the way we work, education, the way we shop, our entertainment, everything, right? And that has been because of social distance. And so if you think about just how pervasive other people and social contact is part of our everyday lives, it helps us think about how the kinds of efforts and policies that we promote have the potential to either make this problem worse or improve people's social connections.
Yeah.
Because every aspect of life is affected.
Yeah, I would think this whole pandemic is, for some, is going to certainly highlight that how important my human relationships and my social group is. But it's stressful. I mean, stress is really the issue here. Like, right, being left out of the group or feeling disconnected from a friend or the group is stressful, and it's stress really that's the big part of the problem here. Wow. Okay. I could go on, but I just want to appreciate you again for the work you're doing to help us understand the problem. And here at the Relationship School, we're going to certainly do our part of getting people more connected and to feel like they know how to connect better with human beings. It's one of the things we're up to. I'm just going to ask you 2 more questions. Because one of our missions is to reach young people and with relationship education, so kids know how to work through their differences with each other, they feel more connected to themselves and each other. If I had a group of 1,000 high schoolers and you could, I had one opportunity to teach them something about relationships, and you were whispering in my ear, what would you want me to tell them?
I would tell them to be a source of support to others. And the reason why I say this is because, first of all, it helps by focusing on being a source of support to someone else. It's focusing on them. And so any vulnerability that you might be feeling that might hold you back from striking up a conversation with someone, that some of those barriers can be brought down because you're focusing on the other person. The other reason I suggest this is because we know that having social support and knowing that we can rely upon others helps us cope with the stress in our lives, and that by helping others, not only does that help them, but actually it helps you. Mm-hmm. And some research suggests that providing support may be more beneficial than actually receiving support.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. So if it had to be one thing, I guess that would be it.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you. All right. Julianne, where can people find you, your articles, your work?
Yeah. So I'll often alert people to the latest findings via Twitter at @Holt-Lunstad. And then my website is, let's see, I
got it pulled up. Julianne Holt.
So julianneholtlunstad.byu.edu.
Okay, cool. We'll put that all in the show notes, the Twitter handle and this. Great. Thank you again for everything you're doing to help us understand loneliness and social isolation and how we can, motivate to connect more.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope I could help just a little bit.
You did a ton. Okay, if that wasn't sobering, I don't know what was. You increase your chances of living longer, guys, by 90%, okay, on the structural and functional aspects of relationship, right, if you have good relationships, right? And if you just have relationships that feel semi-good, it increases you're going to live longer. It's going to increase your chances of living longer 50%. And, if you're lonely, socially isolated, or living alone, you're going to die sooner, and there's a 26% increase in dying sooner around those 26, 29, 32. Ouch! I just feel motivated here in a different way listening to her speak. I hope that wakes you up a little bit and has you reach out to those lonely friends of yours, or if you're feeling lonely, has you reach out. All right. One of the challenges of people who feel lonely and depressed, for example, is that they don't reach out. for help or hey for connection. They continually stay isolated. Please don't let that be you, all right? Please don't let that be you. Okay, so here's your action step. You are going to reach out to, you're going to do two things. If you're feeling lonely in any way, like no one understands me, or gosh, I'm really alone, or you just haven't been reaching out to people lately for whatever reason, okay, your job is to reach out to one friend and say, and own it, I am feeling lonely, and I think that's not good for me. Just calling myself forward here. Okay, reach out to your friend. You can do that text, email, or Zoom phone, all right? All right, if you're not feeling so much lonely, you have some good connections right now, just feel into your circle of friends and reach out to the one person you feel is somewhat isolated. Maybe they're single and they've been kind of hunkered down for months. Maybe they're not single, but they're in a very challenging marriage and you know that they feel alone inside their marriage. Well, reach out to them and just say, hey, I see you. I know you're probably feeling alone today. I'm here. All right. If you have a dying parent or an aging parent, same thing. If they're living alone in a nursing home or a retirement center, or if they're at home and they live alone, you know that hearing this podcast, there's a cost. So reach out to them today and just say, hey, just thinking of you. Wanted to let you know that I love you. I care about you. All right. Okay. Those are your action steps. Awesome. Final action step, of course, is to consider applying for our coaches training. We are training relational leaders, folks. Those are relationship coaches who are going to go out and help people feel less lonely and more connected. All right. And in the coach-client relationship, that happens. People feel seen for the first time. They feel understood for the first time. And it's like, whoa, I didn't even know this is possible. Okay, if you want to be one of those people who is an agent of change and transformation, and you've thought about, living a life of service, come check us out, relationshipschool.com/RCT if you want to apply. And now is the time to move on your longing to serve and be of service to other people. There's so many people that are hurting right now. So answer that call if you want. Okay, one place to do that is here at the Relationship School by becoming a relationship coach. In 9 months, you can become a certified level 1 relationship coach and start charging money and receiving paying clients to help them. And our training is very unique. All right, we supervise you, we watch you coaching other people. We provide you a very in-depth training on how relationships work in our frame and how to do them well. That's called the Deep Psychology of Intimate Relationships, otherwise known as Deeper. All right, you get that course inside of our coaching program. So yeah, make your investment. Let's go. You'll get on the phone with me and we'll talk to see if you are a good fit. All you got to do is apply, guys. relationshipschool.com/RCT. Until next time, stay safe and stay connected. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships. And you are one of them, so thank you.